So, where I'm at here in Kansas City, this time of year, there's a lot going on around graduations. Graduation Recognition Sunday for us is coming up. And wherever you're at, or whenever you're watching this, perhaps you're also entwined with all of those happenings around the end of high school, the beginning of some new adventure for these young people. When I'm thinking about high school, it's just kind of drawn up some of my own memories, of thinking about what I was involved in and how I participated and the kinds of things I did while I was coming into this time of life, graduating. I recognize that for me, high school was a good experience. It was fun, it was energizing. I was involved in many things, and specifically, I was really involved in speech and drama. I know that getting involved in those activities were instrumental in me becoming who I am today. That friend group, that schedule, the things we did, and the ways we worked together. The choice to become involved in debate and forensics was just formational. Again, I think I am who I am today, in large part because of that choice, because of those experiences. I wonder if you are thinking about your own high school experience. Perhaps you're still in high school. What were you involved in, or what are you involved in now? Just type that in the comments. I would love to know a little bit more about you and what your experience has been or is right now in high school. Maybe football, band, maybe media and communications. There are lots of different ways we can get involved. Even those who don't consider themselves part of a group find that that choice also defines their high school experience. It sets them on a path. It gives them a certain way of understanding themselves and the world. Our clothes, our music, our relationships, all touched by being part or not being part of a group of those activities. High school is maybe the time in my experience that is most true, most likely to have an impact. Now, while we embrace diversity as a church, I suggest that being a follower of Jesus is also formational. Much like the way we participate in those high school groups and activities, the ways in which we come together as a church, the things we do, the values we profess, form us. They shape us. We might not all dress the same or listen to the same music, but if we seek to be more like Jesus, we will say and do the things that Jesus said and do. We will become more and more like Jesus. We'll begin to look more and more like Christ. Those who do not follow Jesus then should be able to tell who is following Jesus by the ways we are in the world. I wonder for you, again, a question, what does it mean for you to be a follower of Jesus? If you think about followers of Jesus, whether you are one or consider yourself one or not, what do you consider a follower of Jesus to look like, to be like? How can others know if someone is a follower or not? What would motivate anyone into joining this movement and becoming more like Christ? Those are the questions I'm wrestling with. That's kind of what I'm wondering about. Because it seems to me, again, that if you choose this life, if you choose to follow after Jesus, we're going to start to look alike. We're going to start to feel like we belong to something. We're going to begin to say and do similar kinds of things. One way we might recognize a Jesus follower then from others in our larger culture, one distinctive, could be how we treat our enemies. As we've been engaging this particular series, Faces of KC, we've learned from Jesus in Matthew's gospel, one of those stories of Jesus' life. In Matthew 5, verses 46 to 47, in the Message paraphrase, we started the series this way: if all you do is love the lovable, do you expect a bonus? Anybody could do that. If you simply say hello to those who greet you, do you expect a medal? Any run-of-the-mill sinner does that. And then in Matthew 5:48, so just the following verse, Jesus invites us to grow up as we live generously and graciously toward others, the way that God lives towards us. In other words, it seems to me how we treat folks, especially those who treat us poorly, should be different. It should look so different that others may be encouraged to join us in living this different way, this Jesus way. As the early church formed, this is how it started. This is how things began. But before long, people drifted from this way of being, the following of the way of Jesus. It turns out that the culture of empire is hard to resist, and it's easy to follow. So this idea of looking out for you and yours, take what you want, when you want, just do it, have it your way. Don't let anyone or anything stop you. If someone tries, they deserve whatever is coming to them. That had been the dominant message for much of the world when Christ began his public ministry. But he preached and he lived a different way, a different life. Love, joy, peace, patience. These aren't about getting ahead, taking what you want and fending for yourself. These are relational and sacrificial, and I think I can even say much harder. So Paul, an early adopter of this Jesus way, of this way of living like Christ, and one who saw it as his life's work to encourage others to make the same choices he made, to choose to follow this way, writes reminders to that early church, writes as a pastor might to many of those struggling new communities of faith caught between living the dominant culture and living into this new one. Because even after Jesus initiated it, there's still this pull, this give and take. And so Paul comes along a little bit after Christ, maybe 50 years, 100 years, and he writes to these fledgling faith communities, these new churches, trying to remind them, trying to encourage them that they could live as Jesus taught. Let me just share one such reminder with you now. This, again, in our Newer Testament, this is a letter we call a letter to the Romans. I'm going to read from the 12th chapter, beginning with the 14th verse. Paul says, "Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, 'It is mine to avenge, I will repay,' says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Friends, this is the word of God for the people of God, and we would say, thanks be to God. This idea of how we might live, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Bless those who persecute you, Paul says. Live in harmony with others. Don't be conceited. Associate with folks doing that menial work, those low-paying, unglamorous jobs. Don't pay back the evil you receive. Instead, live at peace with everyone. That's different. Folks would take notice of that. If you saw that kind of living going on, people would pay attention. Some might even decide it was worth trying for themselves. Again, remember, this is a letter written to be shared in the church. This is those fledgling communities of faith, these new Christians, these converts to the way of Jesus. Paul is writing to them. He isn't saying to non-believers, this is how you should live, but to those who are following Jesus. This is the way to do that. This is what it's supposed to look like, he says. This is a letter for the insiders. In other words, I want to suggest that if you are a Christ follower, this is a letter for you. It's a letter for me. A reminder of what this life is meant to look like. I am becoming increasingly convinced this is what we are still being called to do. That loving God and loving our neighbors, especially those who make it hard to love them, is at the heart of Jesus' message. He showed us what it can look like. Those who came after teach us how difficult and how rewarding it can be. But now we've got to ask, what does it look like for us to love not just the likable, not just the ones who love us, but the stranger, the outcast, the enemy? How can we become people of peace? This way of Jesus. Will it surprise you if I say it probably means seeking out opportunities to rejoice with those who are rejoicing, to mourn with those who are mourning? That we would come alongside people around us. We would get to know them. We would get to know the stranger. We would even engage our enemies so that we could find ways to bless them. Regarding this idea of blessing others, even our enemies, there's an interesting line in our reading that's always stuck out to me. We heard, if your enemy's hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, get them a drink. This was wisdom shared from Proverbs. Again, if you go back into our Older Testament, these sayings, these just pieces of wisdom, how we're meant to live this life, what it's supposed to look like. One of those pieces of wisdom, Proverbs 25, has this very point. They're hungry, feed them. Thirsty, get them a drink. But it's the next part that didn't quite fit. Doesn't quite make sense to me. Being generous to enemies will heap burning coals on their head. There are several ways I've come to think about that idea, that I might be able to make sense of this notion of heaping burning coals on someone's head. It could be that by being kind to meanies, will make their bad behavior even more noticeable. It'll be a contrasting way of interacting. It will magnify then the punishment that is going to come to them. I'll heap coals on their head, right? Point out how wrong and bad they are. That's one way I might interpret that. It could be that this idea of heaping coals is about being nice to nasty people, and that will cause them to become uncomfortable in their own behavior. Heaping these coals, right? That would be uncomfortable perhaps, and perhaps that would shame them into changing their behavior. Both maybe negative interpretations of attitude adjustment, behavior modification, right? If I'm nice to them, if I'm kind to them, if I'm generous to them, then maybe they'll change their behavior because they'll be ashamed or they'll be punished into doing something different. There's a third way I think that might be interesting, though. Offering hospitality will help heal what's broken in someone's life and restore them to community. Could that be what heaping coals is about? I like this third option the best. We, after all, are told that Jesus didn't come to condemn the world, not to punish the world, not to cause us to be ashamed of our behavior, but to save us, to save the world. We read that in John 3:17. God, you see, through Jesus, initiates restoration with us so that we could then initiate restoration with others. God heals what's broken in us so that we could be instruments of peace in the world, so that we could offer that healing, that hope, that new life that has been given to us. As a matter of fact, this particular interpretation, I think, has some merit. It has some legs on it for me. If you just go back a verse before what we read today, I read beginning in verse 14 in Romans 12. But verse 13, Paul says simply, practice hospitality. One way in which we're meant to be in this world is to practice hospitality. Offering food and drink to those who are hungry and thirsty are certainly acts of hospitality. We still, in our own context, use food and drink to communicate love all the time. But burning coals, I get the food, I get, right, and they're thirsty. I get burning coals. Well, imagine with me for a moment that you live during this time that Paul is writing. Right? This is first century. Paul writes these words some, again, 50, maybe 100 years after Jesus lived. At this time, families kept hearth fires burning in their homes for heating and cooking. If the fire went out, if the coals were cold, that would impact the family, right? They wouldn't have warmth. They wouldn't be able to cook. If the fire went out, if the coals were cold, then a person might travel to a neighbor's house and ask for a coal from their fire to restart the fire in their own home. Seeing a person traveling back from a neighbor's house with a coal, perhaps kept in a container carried on the head, other neighbors might add a coal to strengthen the fire being rebuilt and perhaps to help keep that borrowed coal from also cooling. In this way, someone whose fire went out might return home, passing various other neighbors, eventually accumulating a heaping pile of coals. They would use that pile of coals then to restart their life-giving, life-sustaining fire. Could it be that practicing hospitality, Paul's saying, give them food if they're hungry, give them something to drink if they're thirsty. By that act of hospitality, we might restore them to health and vitality. We might help fix what's gone cold in them. We might help them rekindle their lives. How are we to love our enemies? What could it look like? Could it be practicing hospitality? Could it be that simple? Could it be by engaging others and meeting their needs, we open a pathway that allows us to restore one another to community? Heaping up the coals. It's what God has done in us and for us. And it's what we could do for others, even our enemies. And again, friends, I'm convinced of all the reasons you might follow after Jesus, this to me is the most compelling reason. To receive this new life, this new fire, not to hoard it or keep it to ourselves, but to recognize that others also need that life, that we might share it with them. And friends, who needs that more? Who needs to be restored more than those that are outcast, those that are against us, those that are actively choosing to oppose us? Who more do we have an opportunity to be in community with and practice hospitality with than our enemies? What good does it do if we're nice to the people who are nice to us? How hard is it to love those who love us? But oh my goodness, how much of an impact will it make? How much of a difference could it be if we practice this kind of love, this hospitality, this kind of giving of ourselves to our enemies? You know that building relationships and practicing the hospitality I'm talking about is going to require us engaging other people. If we're going to love strangers and even our enemies, we have to get to know them and their needs. Are they hungry? How do you know? You gotta find that out. Are they thirsty? You might have to ask. It starts by getting to know our enemies. Living in peace with others as much as it depends on us, right? That's the call. Live in peace. If we're going to do that, it could look like, hello, my church is taking pictures of our neighbors. Can I take your picture? That's what we did at the beginning of this Faces of KC project. Lisa Wood, a member here at North Cross, along with Pastor Mary, went out into our community. And they sought out people that they could identify as being different than them. People they didn't know, people that they became curious about, and they approached them with a simple hello. I wonder if it'd be okay. We're trying to get to know our neighbors. Could I take your picture for this project that we're doing back at my church where we're trying to talk about what it looks like for us to be open to other folks, to be good neighbors, to be able to engage our community? Could I just take your picture? And what happened as a result of that initial hello and that request to take a picture, many people said yes. And that began some interaction. And for those that were open and willing, a conversation could ensue. Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? That's what could follow. Lisa heard about the lives of these children and women, men in our community, began to piece together little bits of who they are and what makes them tick, so that she could rejoice with those who are rejoicing, and she could mourn with those who mourn. Do you see, friends? The point is to begin to strip away the idea that there are some people that we like and some people we don't like. There are friends and there are enemies. What if we began just to recognize we're all children of God? We all are broken. We all have needs. We are all, at one point or another, hungry and thirsty, and we are waiting for someone to come alongside of us and to offer us the hospitality that will meet our needs. What will make a difference in this world? This is it. Being like Jesus, living like Jesus, choosing to follow Jesus isn't about sitting and watching a worship experience. It's about practicing hospitality with our neighbors, in our community, with those who look like us and act like us, and those who are as far removed from our experience as you can possibly imagine. And I want to suggest the more we move towards those folks, the more we will find Christ. Hello, can I take your picture? You know, that could be creepy, so be careful with that, right? It was all set up in the frame of, I'm trying to get to know my community. And if that's your intention, then friends, I know you will find creative ways to do that. To buy a meal for a stranger, to simply smile and say hello, to hold open a door, to let somebody else go first, to let somebody else merge in front of you in traffic. Finding the ways that we can be people of peace, that we won't insist on our own way. We won't continually fight for our rights. We won't stand up and say, I want it and I want it all now. Instead, we might move gently through this world, looking for opportunities to help others be restored, renewed, heaping coals upon their head so that they could have warmth and new life. Will you pray with me? God, I do not pretend to have it all figured out. And God, I know that the kind of life you're inviting us to is not easy. And so, God, I pray for your help. I pray for your wisdom to know when and how to help. I pray, God, that you might open my heart, soften my heart, God, to make me more receptive to the stranger, to the outcast, that I will begin to engage my enemy so that they might know your love. And God, I don't pray this just for me. I pray this for anyone who's listening, anyone who's hearing, anyone who's imagining what it could look like in their own life. I wonder if you would call to mind an enemy that they've been struggling with. If you'd paint the picture in their mind of whoever that is. And that God, you would allow them the opportunity to meet that person's need. Whatever that need is, God, I pray that you open them to receiving that person as a child of God, that they might be curious about what is going on in their world, that they might make a move towards practicing hospitality for that one. I know we need your help in this, God, so I pray for your Spirit to do that work. I pray it in the name of your Son, Jesus, who lived and taught and died for this work. I pray it would be so now and always.